Welcome back to Designsmith. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the weekly favorites that I found on Pinterest. Before we get started, please subscribe to support the channel. Alright, so first up is this really awesome book cover. And this is a fantastic example of using simplicity to perfectly communicate your message. I love how we have these shapes right here for the outer part of the eye, and it's perfectly contrasted with this blue part of the eye right here. I also love how it's printed behind the black outline, almost as if it's an afterthought. But obviously it can't be too much of an afterthought because then it would be printed on top of the black outline. But this is a perfect example of a balance between a stroke and a fill working together harmoniously. And while I'm not a huge fan of the font they're using here, I do love how it's stamped into the cover of the book. It just takes the idea of noticing to a different level. And this is one of those things that I wish I could see in person, just so I could see that level of detail there. But overall, it's a very simple and cool effect, and I love the use of it on an actual book cover. Alright, next up is this cool figure it out design. I imagine this is a poster, it kind of looks like one, but this is another example of taking a very simple concept and really bringing it through to its end to communicate a simple message. And I'm not really sure what these essays are particularly, but it's obviously conveying a message that there's something for us to figure out. And the two main visuals that I'm getting from this are like shoestrings or spaghetti noodles, something that's really jumbled together and you kind of have to untie the knots. And I also how these, we'll just call them spaghetti noodles, are going from these top letters down to the bottom letters here. And I would say beyond the main composition of the design, the thing that drew me to it was the color palette. I absolutely love like this teal green kind of mixed together with this salmon red color. The two just work really well together. Personally, I wouldn't have thrown in that blue, but somehow it just works and it looks great. Alright, next up is this Nice Noise Now poster, and this is so cool. This is very unusual. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before. But it kind of looks like those rollers that roll up against each other to kind of flatten things out. But it's such a creative use of the typography, and the lighting here really reinforces the idea. If I had this vision in my head, I wouldn't exactly go about it this way. I would try to make it more perfectly cylindrical, but it would probably end up looking a little too perfect and not as natural as this looks. It's just such a really cool design, very interesting color choices, and I love the fact that they're using the blue twice. This is definitely something to not be afraid of. If you're going to do a poster, you can definitely repeat the use of a color in a section. Just because you have a new section doesn't mean you have to use a new color. And obviously this is meant to be printed and read at large sizes. We can't read these little blocks of type right here, but it's just such a cool inclusion and it offers the poster enormous balance. So overall, fantastic design. This was definitely one of my favorites among the favorites. All right, next up is this really awesome type layout. I imagine this is probably for some kind of a print or magazine ad, but this looks like a washer and dryer, and I just love this layout. There's a part of me that's a little bit uncomfortable, not because of this slant, but because of how these two type blocks are touching each other. I would probably never arrive at this myself, but the fact that you can still read both of the words there gives me a lot of comfort. This is one of those situations where I have to tell myself it's not really as bad as you think. And it's so interesting to me how you see the side of the washer and the front of the dryer. It's just a very different and unique way to showcase the products here. And I love how the text box perfectly matches the width of the dryer. And even though there's a teeny tiny amount of margin here between these, it just works really well. And I know I've talked about this before in a lot of my poster design videos, but notice the spacing right here. Here's your baseline, and the descender or the overshoot is going below that baseline there. So you see it's not just something I made up. But this huge block of type, and then the medium one, and the small one, they just all work together to create beautiful design harmony. I don't know if there's necessarily anything about this that I would change, although if pushed, I would say maybe make this a little bit smaller and move it a little bit closer to the page margin and not necessarily aligned with this A right here. I'd have to see the original grid for this design, but that's probably all I would change. Alright, next up is this really cool Swiss layout. And just like a lot of the other ones, the first thing that jumped out to me was the color. And this is a Swiss typography poster about Swiss typography posters. So it's kind of giving you the information of the style and where it all emerged from. But it's just such an interesting layout, and I love how we have this large rectangle that's covering a big portion of the large letters here around the edges. And they're obviously using some type of grid here. You can actually see the gutters going on here in between these. And this is very interesting. I don't know if I've ever tried this myself, but they're laying type directly on top of other type, and that's just so interesting. This is not something you see a ton of. I may actually play around with something like this in a future Swiss video. But overall, a really cool layout and a lot of things to be inspired by here. Alright, next up is this really awesome layout. I'm imagining this is probably a clock or a calendar of some kind. I haven't really analyzed it too much, But really overall, I just love the layout and the composition of everything that's going on here. Even if you took away the type so the viewer had no context as to what it was, it's a very cool design overall, and it makes really good use of the Pathfinder in creating all of the spacing here. And again, you can tell that they used a grid because of all the open gutters here. I don't have any surrounding context as to who created this poster and why, if it's supposed to advertise a product or an event of some kind, so I can't really say too much more about it, but I just love it. Okay, this next one up here, I'm guessing it's a web layout, but it got me thinking. I've never actually tried my hand at creating a long Swiss style poster before, so I think that I might do that in a future video. And there's a lot going on here, but there's also a lot of structure. And just like posters and Swiss design, web design also uses their own grids. And at first I was thinking, why would you spell silo this way? It's kind of confusing, but then I saw that it's a face. It's just a really great example of the longer you look at something, the more you tend to see. And it has a fantastic use of negative space down here. There are a lot of people, typically non-designers, that will look at this and say, oh, we've got to fill in the space with something. But just remember, most of the time, the use of negative space gives the design a very elegant feel. Of course, you may not always be going for that, so keep that in mind. And I just love the all black everywhere except for this one pink box right here. It's just a very interesting visual layout, and it's definitely inspired me to try my hand at creating a long poster. Alright, last up is going to be this very simple Friends poster. Now, I was never really a big fan of the show Friends. I definitely preferred Seinfeld over Friends, but I do recognize that you can have both. Anyway, the show aside, this is a very cool poster. The use of the Swiss layout combined with traditional Bauhaus colors is really cool here, and I love the overlapping of these two creating green, and while technically these two should overlap to create orange, it doesn't bother me. A poster like this is so simple in the content and its messaging that it's really good practice for any new designers that are trying to learn Swiss design. So definitely practice by laying your text on top of here and study the relationship between the font sizes. If you want to learn more about that, check out this video right up here. Alright, well here are all the posters that we talked about today. Let me know which one your favorite is down in the comments below. I hope this video was inspiring to you. If it was, please give it a like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.